3:47 in the morning. That's the exact time I called my wife from the hospital parking lot, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold my phone, to tell her that everything I had believed about reality for 54 years had just been shattered by events so impossible that our entire cardiac unit had been evacuated 2 hours earlier. My name is Dr. Ricardo Mendoza Vasquez. I'm a cardiologist at Hospital de Especialidades UMAI, 25 in Monterrey, Mexico. And for 28 years, I built my reputation on scientific skepticism so rigid that colleagues called me Dr. Atheist, the physician who mocked patients' faith, who ridiculed families praying for miracles, who believed that anything unexplained by current medical knowledge was simply evidence of diagnostic incompetence, never divine intervention. But on October the 10th, 2024, a teenager who had been dead for 18 years walked into my intensive care unit and told me that within 48 hours, I would witness supernatural events so undeniable that they would force me to choose between maintaining my comfortable atheism or accepting that science, no matter how advanced, can only measure creation, never explain its ultimate source. What happened in those 48 hours didn't just change my understanding of medicine. It exposed the profound arrogance of believing that what we cannot measure cannot exist. I need to be honest about who I was before October 10th, because understanding my transformation requires understanding the depth of my former convictions. I wasn't simply a non-believer or an agnostic who remained open to possibilities beyond material explanation. I was an active, aggressive atheist who took genuine pleasure in dismantling the religious faith of patients and their families. My medical career began in 1996, when I graduated from the Autonomous University of Nuevo León with top honors in cardiology. From my very first year of practice, I established a reputation for two things: exceptional diagnostic accuracy and brutal honesty about prognosis. I believed, truly believed, that giving patients false hope based on religious fantasies was more cruel than delivering hard medical truths, no matter how devastating. My specialty was complex cardiomyopathy cases, patients whose heart muscle had deteriorated to the point where transplant was the only option, and often not even that would help. These cases attracted desperate families, and desperate families often turned to prayer, saints, and miracles, which gave me endless opportunities to educate them about reality. I remember one case vividly from 2015. A 12-year-old boy named Mateo with dilated cardiomyopathy so severe that his ejection fraction, the percentage of blood his heart could pump with each beat, had dropped to 12%. Normal is 55 to 70%. Below 30 is considered severe heart failure. Mateo was living at 12%, which defied every medical expectation. His mother was convinced that the Virgin of Guadalupe would cure him. She filled his hospital room with religious images, brought priests to pray over him, organized prayer vigils. It infuriated me. "Señora," I told her during one consultation, my voice sharp with impatience, "your son doesn't need prayers. He needs a heart transplant. The Virgin of Guadalupe is a religious symbol, not a cardiac surgeon. Every hour you waste praying is an hour we could spend on the transplant list." She looked at me with tears streaming down her face and said, "Doctor, can't you believe in both? Can't we pursue medical treatment and also ask God for help?" "No," I said flatly, "because one is real and one is superstition, and confusing the two is dangerous." Mateo died 3 weeks later, never having received a transplant. His mother's faith didn't save him. I used that case for years as proof that prayer was worthless. My atheism wasn't just intellectual, it was personal. I had grown up in a nominally Catholic family in Monterrey, attending Mass occasionally as a child, making my first communion because it was expected. But by the time I entered medical school, I had completely rejected religion. The more I learned about human anatomy, physiology, and biochemistry, the more convinced I became that humans were simply sophisticated biological machines. The heart was a pump. The brain was a computer. Consciousness was an emergent property of neural networks. There was no soul, no spirit, no divine spark, just atoms and molecules following physical laws. This worldview shaped how I practiced medicine. I was technically excellent. My diagnostic accuracy was among the highest in our hospital system. But I was also cold, dismissive of patients' emotional needs, contemptuous of any attempt to introduce spiritual care into medical treatment. When our hospital chaplain tried to visit my patients, I often blocked him. "Father, these people need medicine, not mythology. Please don't waste their time with superstitious nonsense." My colleagues found me difficult. Nurses complained that I made religious patients uncomfortable with my aggressive atheism. Hospital administrators occasionally reprimanded me for my bedside manner. But my clinical results were too good to fire me, and my absolute certainty about the supremacy of scientific materialism was, I thought, my greatest strength as a physician. My personal life reflected the same rigid rationalism. My wife, Elena, was a cultural Catholic who occasionally attended Mass, but didn't press the issue with me. Our two children, Diego and Sofia, yes, named after the same saint whose intercession would later shatter my worldview, were raised without religious education. "I want them to think critically," I told Elena, "not to accept ancient superstitions uncritically." Elena tolerated my atheism, but never fully embraced it. Sometimes I would catch her praying quietly before bed, or notice she had placed a small crucifix in our daughter's room. I considered these harmless concessions to cultural tradition. Nothing more. I had no idea that my wife had been praying for my conversion for 23 years, or that those prayers were about to be answered in the most dramatic way imaginable. October 2024 was an unusually difficult month in our cardiac ICU. We had admitted a cluster of pediatric cases so severe that they challenged even my considerable experience. 3 children with terminal dilated cardiomyopathy, 2 teenagers with inoperable congenital heart defects, and 1 newborn with hypoplastic left heart syndrome, a condition where the left ventricle never properly develops, leaving the heart unable to pump blood effectively to the body. But the case that would ultimately become the center of my transformation was 8-year-old Sofia Martinez. She had been admitted 6 weeks earlier with idiopathic dilated cardiomyopathy, meaning her heart muscle had stretched and weakened for reasons we couldn't identify. No genetic markers, no viral infections, no toxin exposure. Her heart had simply started failing, and nothing we tried could stop the deterioration. By early October, Sofia's condition had become medically impossible. Her echocardiogram showed an ejection fraction of just 15%. Her heart was so enlarged and weak that it barely functioned. She should have been dead. Every medical text, every study, every piece of clinical evidence said that a child cannot survive with cardiac function that compromised. Yet Sofia was not only alive, but occasionally sat up in bed, smiled at her parents, even asked for her favorite foods. The Martinez family was intensely Catholic, not just nominally religious, but genuinely, devotedly faithful in a way I found both fascinating and infuriating. They attended daily Mass when not at the hospital. They prayed the rosary together every evening at Sofia's bedside. They had covered her room with holy cards, prayer intentions written on scraps of paper, and images of saints I didn't recognize. One saint in particular seemed to be the focus of their devotion, a young teenage boy in jeans and sneakers. I finally asked Sofia's father, Miguel, who this was. "Blessed Carlo Acutis," he explained with quiet reverence. He was an Italian teenager who died of leukemia in 2006, when he was only 15. He was beatified 4 years ago. He loved the Eucharist and documented miracles. We're asking for his intercession for Sofia's healing. I couldn't help my derisive snort. "Mr. Martinez, with all due respect, your daughter doesn't need a dead teenager's intercession. She needs advanced cardiac medication and possibly a transplant if we can stabilize her enough. Saints can't fix failing hearts. Medicine can." Miguel looked at me with an expression I would only later recognize as profound pity. Not for his dying daughter, but for me. "Dr. Mendoza," he said gently, "we're pursuing every medical treatment you recommend. But we also believe that God works through medicine and beyond it. Can't both be true?" "No," I said firmly, "because one is measurable reality and the other is wishful thinking. I've practiced cardiology for 28 years. I've never seen prayer cure dilated cardiomyopathy. I've seen medications work. I've seen transplants work. Prayer, never." What I didn't tell Miguel, what I barely admitted to myself, was that Sophia's continued survival bothered me deeply. She shouldn't be alive. Her cardiac function was incompatible with life. Yet she persisted, stable enough to be conscious, to speak, to interact with her family. It was an anomaly I couldn't explain, so I categorized it as insufficient data and moved on to cases that fit known medical parameters. On October 9th, the day before everything changed, I had a particularly difficult conversation with the Martinez family. Sophia's condition had worsened slightly. Her blood pressure was dropping, her oxygen saturation declining. I knew we were approaching the end. "Mr. and Mrs. Martinez," I said, using the formal clinical tone I employed for end-of-life discussions. "I need you to understand that Sophia's heart is failing beyond our capacity to support it medically. We should begin discussing palliative care, keeping her comfortable rather than pursuing aggressive interventions that will only prolong suffering without changing the outcome." Sophia's mother, Rosa, began crying quietly. Miguel put his arm around her and said, "Doctor, we appreciate your honesty, but we're not ready to give up. We believe God can still perform a miracle." I felt my professional patience snap. "Mrs. Martinez, miracles don't exist. I know that's hard to hear, but I owe you the truth. What you call miracles are either misdiagnoses, spontaneous remissions we don't fully understand yet, or simply coincidences given religious interpretation by people who want to believe in supernatural intervention. Your daughter has dilated cardiomyopathy. It's a progressive, terminal condition. No amount of prayer will change that medical reality." Miguel stood up, his face showing not anger but a deep, sorrowful certainty. "Dr. Mendoza, I pray that someday you'll discover how wrong you are. Not for my sake, but for yours. Living in a universe where everything is just mechanical chance must be terribly lonely." His words stung in a way I didn't expect, but I dismissed the feeling. I was the one dealing in reality. They were the ones hiding behind comforting delusions. I left their room that evening feeling frustrated but certain of my righteousness. That night, October 9th, I stayed late finishing paperwork. Around 10 p.m., I walked through the cardiac ICU on my way out and noticed the Martinez family gathered around Sophia's bed, praying the rosary. The repetitive murmur of their prayers, "Santa María, Madre de Dios, ruega por nosotros pecadores," followed me down the corridor. I remember thinking, what a waste of time. If they spent half as much energy accepting reality as they do praying to imaginary saints, they'd be better prepared for what's coming. I had no idea that I was the one unprepared for what was coming. That within 24 hours my reality would be revealed as a prison of limited perception. That the imaginary saint they were praying to would appear physically in my ICU and demonstrate truths that would shatter every certainty I had built my life upon. October 10th, 2024 started as an ordinary night shift. I arrived at the hospital at 7 p.m. to relieve the day cardiologist, reviewed patient charts, made my evening rounds. Sophia's condition was unchanged, still impossibly alive, still defying every medical prediction. Her family was there, as always, praying quietly. Around 11 p.m., I was at the nurse's station reviewing lab results when I became aware of someone approaching. I looked up and saw a teenage boy, perhaps 15 years old, walking down the ICU corridor as if he had every right to be there. My first reaction was irritation. Visitors weren't allowed in the ICU during night shifts, and certainly not teenage visitors wandering unsupervised. Our security system was supposed to prevent unauthorized access. How had this kid gotten past the locked doors, the front desk, the nursing station checkpoints? The boy was dressed casually, jeans, sneakers, a t-shirt with Latin text I couldn't quite read from a distance. He carried what looked like a tablet computer. But what struck me most was his demeanor. He didn't look lost or worried or like he was sneaking around. He looked completely at ease, almost joyful, as if walking through a cardiac ICU at midnight was the most natural thing in the world. "Excuse me," I called out, standing up. "This is a restricted area. How did you get in here?" The boy walked directly toward me, smiling. "Dr. Mendoza," he said in perfect Spanish with a slight accent I couldn't place. "I need to talk to you about Sofia Martinez. There's something about her case you haven't understood correctly." The fact that he knew my name and my patient's name should have alarmed me more than it did. Instead, I felt a strange combination of curiosity and unease. "Who are you? Did her family send you? Because if you're some kind of faith healer, you can turn around and leave right now. This is a medical facility, not a church." The boy's smile widened. "My name is Carlo Acutis. I was born on May 3, 1991, in London, England. I died on October 12, 2006, at age 15, from fulminant leukemia. I was beatified on October 10, 2020, in Assisi, Italy. And I'm here to help you understand something important about the relationship between faith and science." For a moment, I just stared at him. Then I laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "Okay, I don't know what kind of prank this is, but it's not funny. Carlo Acutis has been dead for 18 years. You're obviously a disturbed kid with religious delusions, possibly from Sofia's church community. I'm calling security." I reached for the phone, but Carlo placed his hand gently on my arm. His touch was real, physical, warm, not ghostly or ethereal. "Dr. Mendoza, before you call security, let me show you something." He held up his tablet and I saw Sofia's complete medical file displayed on the screen. Her admission notes, lab results, echocardiogram measurements, medication history. Information that should have been protected by multiple layers of hospital security and patient privacy protocols. "How did you access that?" I demanded. "That's confidential patient information. You could be prosecuted for—" "Look at the numbers, doctor," Carlo interrupted, his voice still gentle but now carrying unmistakable authority. "You told Sofia's family there's no medical explanation for her still being alive with 15% cardiac function. You're right, there is no medical explanation. But you've never considered that maybe there's no medical explanation because you're operating within an incomplete scientific paradigm." Despite my anger at the security breach, I found myself looking at the data on his screen. He was right. The numbers were medically impossible. "What are you suggesting?" I asked warily. "I'm suggesting," Carlo said, "that during your 28-year career, you've witnessed dozens of cases where patients survived beyond all medical predictions. Spontaneous remissions, unexpected recoveries, diagnoses that proved wrong. And every single time, you categorize these events as coincidences or insufficient data, rather than investigating whether there might be forces at work that current scientific instruments can't measure." His words hit uncomfortably close to truths I had always avoided examining. There had been cases, many cases, where outcomes defied expectations. I had always found ways to rationalize them within materialist frameworks, but honest reflection would have revealed how often those rationalizations were forced, how often I was ignoring evidence that didn't fit my worldview. Carlo continued, his young face showing a depth of understanding that seemed impossible for a 15-year-old. "Dr. Mendoza, you pride yourself on scientific precision. So let me ask you a precise scientific question. What animates the human heart? You can describe the electrical impulses, the muscle contractions, the biochemical processes. But what is the ultimate source of that animation? What keeps your own heart beating right now, 100,000 times a day, year after year, without your conscious control? Autonomous nervous system regulation of cardiac muscle, I answered automatically. Basic physiology. And what regulates the autonomous nervous system? Carlo pressed. And what regulates that? At what point in your reductionist chain of causation do you arrive at first cause? Or do you believe in an infinite regress of purely material causes with no ultimate origin? I felt myself growing defensive. That's philosophy, not medicine. My job is to treat the heart as a physical organ, not to speculate about metaphysics. But what if your refusal to consider metaphysics, Carlo said softly, has made you blind to realities that directly impact your patients? What if Sophia is alive not despite her failing heart, but because there are forces sustaining her that your instruments can't detect? Before I could respond, he touched the tablet screen and brought up a different file. My personal information, my home address, my wife's name, my children's names, details about my education, my career, my publications. Information that was technically public but would take significant effort to compile. How did you? I began, but Carlo interrupted. Doctor Mendoza, you're married to Elena Gabriela Sanchez. You've been together for 25 years. You have 2 children, Diego, age 22, and Sofia, age 19. You tell everyone you're an atheist, that you've never prayed, that you have no faith. But that's not entirely true, is it? My heart, that autonomous muscle whose ultimate animation I couldn't explain, began beating faster. What are you talking about? 3 years ago, Carlo said, his eyes holding mine with uncomfortable intensity. Your daughter Sophia, the one you named after Saint Sophia, wisdom incarnate, even though you claim to have no faith, was in a serious car accident. She was unconscious for 2 days. The neurologist couldn't tell you if she would wake up or what cognitive function she might retain if she did. And on the second night, alone in the hospital chapel at 2 a.m., you prayed. You don't remember it that way because you've suppressed the memory. You've told yourself it was just exhausted rambling, not real prayer. But you knelt down in that empty chapel and you said, God, if you exist, please don't take my daughter. Please let her wake up whole. I'll do anything. She woke up the next morning with no deficits, and you told yourself it was just the natural course of her recovery, that your prayer had nothing to do with it, that you hadn't really prayed at all. I felt my hands start to shake. How could he know this? I had never told anyone about that night. Not Elena, not my colleagues. I had barely admitted it to myself. I was just stressed, emotional. It didn't mean anything. It meant, Carlo said gently, that somewhere beneath your aggressive atheism, there's a part of you that knows materialism can't explain everything. A part that reaches for something beyond matter when matter fails. And that's the part I'm speaking to now. He glanced at his tablet again. In 48 hours, Dr. Mendoza, this hospital is going to experience events that will force you to choose. You can maintain your materialist certainty and explain away everything you witness as hallucination, equipment malfunction, or mass hysteria. Or you can accept that reality is larger than what your current scientific instruments can measure. That choice will define the rest of your life and your career. What events? I demanded. What are you talking about? Carlo's expression became more serious. Starting tomorrow night, your medical equipment will begin functioning in impossible ways. Monitors will display readings that contradict physical laws. Patients will experience changes that defy every known medical mechanism. And at exactly 3:47 a.m. on October 12th, the anniversary of my death, You'll call your wife from the parking lot because the events you've witnessed will be so overwhelming that the entire cardiac unit will have been evacuated. You'll tell her what you've seen, and she'll tell you something that will complete your transformation." "This is insane," I muttered, but my voice lacked conviction. "Dr. Mendoza," Carlo said, beginning to back away down the corridor. "You've spent 28 years believing that unexplained recoveries are just medical anomalies. Tomorrow you'll discover that some anomalies are actually miracles, interventions from beyond the material plane that science can document but never fully explain. Sofia Martinez isn't alive by coincidence. She's alive because someone has been interceding for her since the moment she entered this hospital. Someone you've been mocking and denying, someone who's standing right in front of you." I blinked, and he was gone. Not walking away, gone, vanished, as if he had never been there at all. I stood frozen at the nurse's station, my rational mind trying desperately to explain what had just happened. Hallucination? No, the conversation had been too coherent, too specific. Elaborate prank? But how would anyone know about that night in the chapel? Mass suggestion? But I was alone. There were no other witnesses to suggest anything to. I checked the security footage. The cameras showed me standing at the nurse's station, apparently talking to empty air for 7 minutes. No teenage visitor. No one approaching or leaving. Just me. Alone. Having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. Or someone who was there but whom cameras couldn't see. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. After my encounter with whatever Carlo Acutis had been, I went through the motions of my shift in a daze. I checked patients, reviewed labs, wrote orders. But my mind kept returning to impossible questions. How did he know about my daughter's accident? How did he access sealed patient files? How did he disappear without walking away? By the time my shift ended at 7 a.m. on October 11th, I had convinced myself it was some kind of stress-induced hallucination. I had been working too many overnight shifts. The pediatric cases were emotionally draining, even if I pretended otherwise. My brain had constructed an elaborate fantasy combining my guilt about my daughter's accident with the religious imagery surrounding Sofia Martinez's case. That was the rational explanation. The only rational explanation. I went home, kissed Elena, who was already awake and preparing breakfast, and went to bed. But I couldn't turn off my mind. Carlo's words kept echoing. In 48 hours. Events that will force you to choose. I finally fell into troubled sleep around 10 a.m. and woke at 4 p.m. to a text message from Dr. Patricia Delgado, my colleague covering the day shift. "Ricardo? Something strange happening with monitors in cardiac ICU. Can you come in early? Not emergency, but unusual." I arrived at the hospital at 5 p.m., an hour before my scheduled shift. Patricia met me at the ICU entrance, her face showing a confusion I rarely saw in the normally unflappable physician. "What's going on?" I asked. "I don't know how to describe it," she said, leading me to the central monitoring station. Starting around 2 p.m., the cardiac monitors began displaying impossible readings. Not malfunctioning, the patients are stable, but the numbers don't make sense. She showed me Sofia Martinez's monitor. The echocardiogram measurements, which had shown 15% ejection fraction for weeks, now displayed 22%. That was still critically low, but it represented a 47% improvement in cardiac function. An improvement that couldn't happen spontaneously, certainly not in a matter of hours. "Equipment error," I said immediately. "The echo machine needs recalibration." "That's what I thought," Patricia agreed. So I ran a manual echo myself with a different machine. Same results. "Ricardo, her heart function has improved significantly since yesterday. There's no medical explanation." I felt a chill despite the warm hospital air. "What about the other patients?" Patricia pulled up additional charts. 2 of the 3 children with terminal cardiomyopathy showed similar improvements. Not dramatic enough to call cures, but measurable, documentable changes in cardiac function that shouldn't occur without intervention. "Did you change their medications?" I asked, grasping for rational explanations. "Add new treatments? Adjust dosages?" "Nothing," Patricia said firmly. "Same protocols as yesterday. Ricardo, in 15 years of cardiology, I've never seen spontaneous improvement in multiple end-stage cardiac patients simultaneously. This isn't normal variability. This is something else." I examined the data myself, looking for errors, misreadings, any explanation that fit within known medical parameters. But the numbers were clear, reproducible, documented by multiple independent measurements. Something was happening to our patients' hearts, something that made no medical sense. I thought of Carlo's prediction: "Your medical equipment will begin functioning in impossible ways." But that was absurd. Medical equipment doesn't function impossibly. It either works correctly or malfunctions. This wasn't malfunction. These readings were accurate, which meant the impossible thing wasn't the equipment. It was the patients themselves. The first real shock came at 8 p.m. during evening rounds. I entered Sofia Martinez's room to examine her personally. Her parents were there, as always, praying quietly. Sofia was awake, sitting up in bed, something she had barely been able to do for the past week. "Dr. Mendoza," she said when she saw me, her voice stronger than I had heard in weeks. "I had the most wonderful dream last night. A boy came to visit me. He said his name was Carlo and that he was praying for me to get better." I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "What did this boy look like?" "He was about 15, Sofia said, smiling at the memory. "He had dark hair and kind eyes. He was wearing jeans and sneakers and a t-shirt with words in another language. He told me not to be afraid, that my heart was getting stronger, and that Dr. Mendoza was going to learn something important." Miguel Martinez looked up from his rosary, his eyes meeting mine. "Doctor, that's exactly how Blessed Carlo Acutis looked. We've been praying to him for Sofia's intercession." "It was just a dream," I said, my voice coming out harsher than I intended. "A common dream influenced by the religious imagery you've surrounded her with. It doesn't mean anything." But even as I said it, I knew I didn't believe it. Sofia was describing the same person I had seen at the nurses' station. The same person who had told me that events would begin tomorrow night, which was tonight. I conducted my examination with hands that wanted to shake. Sofia's vital signs were better than they had been in a month. Her color was improved. Her breathing was easier. Her cardiac auscultation revealed a rhythm that was still weak but noticeably stronger than 24 hours earlier. "Her ejection fraction has improved to 22%, I told her parents, trying to keep my voice professionally neutral. "That's unexpected but welcome. We'll continue monitoring closely." Rosa Martinez clasped her hands together. "It's Carlo," she said with absolute certainty. "He's interceding for her. Doctor, don't you see? This is the beginning of a miracle." "It's a spontaneous improvement of unclear etiology," I corrected firmly. "Unusual but not supernatural. We'll run more tests to determine the cause." But as I left their room, Miguel's words from the day before came back to me. "I pray that someday you'll discover how wrong you are." Was I watching that discovery unfold in real time? No, that was irrational. There had to be a medical explanation. I just hadn't found it yet. The night of October 11th transformed from unusual to impossible around 11 p.m. I was reviewing lab results when the cardiac monitors for all 7 of our critical patients suddenly flatlined, showing 0 heart activity. Every alarm in the ICU began screaming simultaneously. Nurses rushed to patient rooms expecting to find cardiac arrests. But every single patient was alive, stable, talking to family members. Their hearts were beating normally. The monitors were simply not detecting what was clearly happening. We assumed massive equipment failure and began switching to backup monitors. But the backup monitors showed the same impossible readings. Flatlines for hearts that were obviously beating. We could hear the heartbeats with stethoscopes, feel pulses in wrists and necks, see chest walls rising and falling with respiration. But no electronic monitor could detect cardiac activity. Then, after exactly 7 minutes of flatlines, all the monitors simultaneously returned to normal function, displaying accurate readings as if nothing had happened. Dr. Delgado, who had stayed late to help with the crisis, looked at me with fear in her eyes. "Ricardo, what the hell was that? All the equipment can't fail simultaneously and then simultaneously recover. That's not how medical equipment works." "System-wide electrical anomaly," I suggested, though I knew that didn't explain why backup systems on separate power sources had shown identical behavior. "We'll have engineering check every connection." But even as I said it, I remembered Carlo's words. "Your medical equipment will begin functioning in impossible ways." Was this what he meant? Equipment that couldn't detect hearts that were clearly beating? That was beyond equipment malfunction. That was equipment defying the basic laws of physics. The events escalated through the night. At 1 a.m., every IV pump in the ICU stopped simultaneously, though they remained powered on and showed no error messages. Medication simply stopped flowing for 12 minutes, then resumed without intervention. At 2:30 a.m., all the digital clocks in the ICU began running backward for exactly 3 minutes, displays counting down rather than up, showing times in reverse sequence. Security cameras captured the phenomenon. It wasn't localized to one piece of equipment. It was affecting every digital display in the entire unit. At 3:15 a.m., we experienced the event that would ultimately lead to evacuation. The temperature in Sofia Martinez's room, according to the digital thermometer, suddenly dropped to negative 15 degrees Celsius. That's well below freezing. The reading held steady for 22 minutes, yet when we entered her room, it was comfortably warm. Sofia and her parents were sitting calmly, completely unaffected by what the instruments claimed was Arctic temperature. Miguel saw my face when I checked the thermometer reading. "Dr. Mendoza," he said calmly, "your instruments are working fine. They're just measuring things you don't believe exist. Carlo is here. His presence is affecting your equipment because he's showing you that reality is larger than what you've allowed yourself to see." "That's impossible," I said reflexively. But the word was beginning to lose meaning. What did impossible even mean when I was watching it happen? At 4 a.m., I called an emergency meeting with hospital administration. Dr. Fernando Guzman, our medical director, listened to my report with increasing alarm. "You're telling me," he said carefully, "that every monitor in the cardiac ICU has been malfunctioning for 5 hours? Multiple independent systems failing in synchronized patterns?" "Not failing exactly," I said, struggling to explain what I didn't understand myself. "Functioning, but displaying readings that don't correspond to observable patient conditions. It's as if the equipment is measuring something we can't see." "Equipment measures what exists," Dr. Guzman said firmly. "If the readings don't match patient presentations, the equipment is malfunctioning. I'm authorizing complete shutdown and replacement of all ICU monitoring equipment. But replacement equipment, brought up from storage and installed by biomedical engineering at 5 a.m., showed exactly the same impossible behaviors. New monitors, never before used in the ICU, displaying the same anomalous readings. Clocks running backward. Temperature sensors showing freezing conditions in warm rooms. Cardiac monitors failing to detect beating hearts. At 5:30 a.m., I stepped outside the ICU into the hallway and leaned against the wall, my mind racing through every rational explanation I could construct. Mass equipment failure from some unknown source? But how could storage equipment we just unpacked show identical anomalies? Electromagnetic interference from a nearby source. But engineering had found no unusual EM fields. Coordinated hacking of hospital systems? But our network security showed no breaches, and the equipment wasn't even networked in some cases. That's when I saw him again. Carlo Acutis, standing at the end of the hallway. looking at me with an expression of gentle compassion. "You're not real," I said aloud, not caring who might hear. "You're a stress hallucination, a psychological manifestation of my anxiety about these equipment failures." Carlo walked toward me, his sneakers silent on the hospital floor. "Dr. Mendoza, if I'm just a hallucination, how did I know about your daughter's accident? How did I predict exactly what would happen in your ICU tonight?" "Lucky guesses," I said desperately. "Coincidences. I'm filling in details my subconscious created." "Then explain this," Carlo said. He held up his tablet and showed me a document I had never seen before. A prayer journal belonging to my wife, Elena. The entries were in her handwriting, distinctive, unmistakable. I could see dates going back 23 years. "November 15th, 2001, Carlo read aloud. "Dear God, Ricardo is a good man, but his heart is so closed to you. Please somehow help him see that there's more to existence than what he can measure in his laboratory. I don't know how you'll reach him, but I trust you'll find a way." He scrolled forward. "March 22nd, 2009. Lord, Ricardo was so cruel to that patient's family today, mocking their faith in your healing power. It broke my heart. Please soften his heart. Show him that science and faith aren't enemies." Forward again. June 8th, 2021. "Our daughter survived her accident, but Ricardo refuses to see your hand in her recovery. He's so determined to explain everything materialistically. God, I'm begging you. Please, before he dies, let him experience something he can't explain away. Let him encounter mystery that breaks through his certainty." I felt tears streaming down my face. "How do you have my wife's journal? Did you break into my house?" "I don't have her journal, Ricardo," Carlo said softly, using my first name for the first time. "I'm showing you what I, as a blessed soul in heaven, can see. The hidden prayers of faithful hearts. Your wife has been interceding for your conversion for 23 years. She's been asking specifically for you to witness something undeniable, something you couldn't rationalize away, and God, in His mercy, has sent me to answer her prayers." "Why you?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why a dead teenager? Why not, I don't know, an angel, or a vision, or something that matches religious expectations?" Carlo smiled. "Because I was a teenager who loved science and computers, who documented miracles using technology, who understood that faith and reason aren't opposites. They're complementary ways of understanding reality. You needed to encounter a saint who speaks your language, Ricardo. Someone who can show you that accepting supernatural reality doesn't mean abandoning scientific thinking. It means recognizing that science studies creation, but can never fully explain the Creator." He gestured back toward the ICU. "In that unit right now, you have equipment that works perfectly, but can't measure what's actually happening. Because what's happening transcends purely physical processes. Sophia's heart is healing through my intercession. A process that involves both material changes in cardiac tissue and spiritual forces your instruments will never detect. Both are real. Both are happening. Your equipment measures one dimension of a multidimensional reality." The sun rose on October the 12th, 2024, the 18th anniversary of Carlo Acutis' death, over a cardiac ICU in controlled chaos. Hospital administration had decided to evacuate all patients to other facilities. Not because of equipment failure, but because of events we couldn't explain or control. The building itself wasn't unsafe. But something was happening that defied institutional protocols designed around purely material reality. I was helping coordinate patient transfers when Dr. Delgado pulled me aside. "Ricardo, I need to tell you something. Last night around 3 a.m. I saw him too. The teenage boy, Carlo. He was standing in Sofia Martinez's room, and he told me that you were going to need support from other physicians who had witnessed unexplained healings. He gave me names of 3 colleagues at different hospitals who had documented impossible recoveries but were afraid to report them publicly. I thought I was losing my mind. But then I contacted those physicians, and Ricardo, they all confirmed they had cases they couldn't explain. Spontaneous tumor dissolutions, terminal patients recovering overnight, healings that defied medical logic. She looked at me with eyes that held fear and wonder in equal measure. He's real, isn't he? Carlo Acutis is actually here, actually intervening. This isn't mass hallucination or equipment failure. This is supernatural intervention. Before I could respond, Miguel Martinez approached us. Dr. Mendoza, Sofia wants to speak with you before the transfer. I went to her room. Sofia was sitting up, looking healthier than she had in 2 months. Her most recent echo, taken just an hour earlier, showed an ejection fraction of 38%. Still below normal, but a dramatic improvement from the 15% of 3 days ago. An improvement that, medically speaking, couldn't happen this quickly without intervention. Dr. Mendoza, Sofia said, her 8-year-old voice carrying unexpected wisdom. Carlo told me to tell you something. He said that at exactly 3:47 this morning, the exact time he died 18 years ago, you're going to have to make a choice. You can explain everything away and go back to believing only in what you can measure. Or you can accept the truth and let it change everything about how you practice medicine and live your life. What truth? I asked, though I already knew the answer. That miracles are real, Sofia said simply. That God works through saints like Carlo to show people that science is wonderful, but incomplete. That there's more to healing than medicines and machines. And that sometimes the most important cures aren't in our bodies, but in our hearts and minds. Rosa Martinez, standing beside her daughter's bed, added, Doctor, your wife has been praying for you for decades. She's been asking God to send you an experience you couldn't deny or explain away. This is that experience. Don't waste it by trying to force it into categories that can't contain it. I left their room and went to the hospital chapel, the same chapel where 3 years earlier I had prayed that desperate prayer for my daughter's life. It was 3 a.m. on October 12th. In 47 minutes, Carlo had predicted I would call my wife. I would tell her about events that had forced evacuation of an entire ICU, and she would tell me something that would complete my transformation. I knelt down in the empty chapel, and for the first time in my adult life, I prayed not from desperation, but from conviction. God, if you're real, and I'm beginning to believe you are, help me understand what I'm supposed to do with this knowledge. How do I practice medicine knowing that healing involves forces I can't measure? How do I serve patients when I now understand that their faith might be more powerful than my medications? At 3:47 a.m. on October 12, 2024, I walked out to the hospital parking lot and called my wife. Elena answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the hour. Ricardo. What's wrong? Are you okay? The entire story poured out of me. Carlo's appearance, the equipment anomalies, Sofia's impossible improvement, the evacuation, my complete inability to explain any of it through conventional medical science. I spoke for 10 minutes straight, while Elena listened in silence. When I finally stopped, exhausted by the confession, Elena said quietly, Ricardo, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've known for 48 hours, but was afraid to share because I thought you'd think I was crazy. What is it? 2 nights ago, October 10th, the anniversary of Carlo's beatification, I had a dream. A teenage boy appeared to me, said his name was Carlo Acutis, and told me that my prayers for your conversion were about to be answered. He said you would witness events at the hospital that would shatter your materialist certainty. He said that on October 12th, at exactly 3:47 a.m., the time of his death, you would call me from the parking lot to tell me about impossible things you had seen. And he told me what I needed to say to you when you called, My hands started shaking. What did he tell you to say? He said I should tell you about the promise I made 23 years ago when we first got married. The promise I've never told you about because I knew you'd mock me for it. What promise? I whispered. Elena took a deep breath. Ricardo, on our wedding day, during the mass you participated in only to please my family, I made a private vow to God. I promised that I would pray every single day for your conversion, no matter how long it took, that I would never give up believing that somehow, someday, God would reach your closed heart and show you that reality is bigger than what you can measure in a laboratory. For 23 years, I've kept that promise. Every single day, I've prayed for you. Even on days when you were particularly cruel about my faith. Even on days when you mocked patience for praying, I prayed and I trusted that God would find a way. I felt something breaking inside my chest, not my physical heart, but something deeper, some wall I had built between myself and truth. Elena, I've been so arrogant, so certain I had reality figured out, so dismissive of anything I couldn't explain. I know, she said gently. But Carlo told me that tonight would be the night you finally understood. He said the events at the hospital would be so undeniable that you couldn't rationalize them away. He said you would call me at this exact time, and that when I told you about my 23 years of prayer, you would finally understand that your wife's faith wasn't superstition. It was access to dimensions of reality your science couldn't reach. He's been here, I said. Physically here. Multiple people have seen him. Equipment has been affected by his presence. Sofia Martinez's heart has healed in ways that violate every known medical principle. Elena, I don't know how to be a doctor anymore if everything I believed about healing is wrong. Everything you believed wasn't wrong, Elena corrected. It was just incomplete. Medicine is real. Science is real. But they're not the whole story. They're tools that a loving God gave humans to participate in his healing work. You don't have to choose between being a good scientist and acknowledging supernatural reality, Ricardo. You just have to expand your understanding of what reality includes. I looked up at the hospital building, where dozens of staff members were completing the evacuation of patients whose conditions had improved impossibly over the past 48 hours. Where monitoring equipment had measured dimensions of reality that materialist science insisted couldn't exist. Where a dead teenager's intercession had produced documentable miracles that would challenge medical paradigms. What do I do now? I asked my wife. You go back inside, Elena said firmly. You finish helping those patients. You document everything that happened with the same scientific rigor you've always used. Because these miracles deserve to be recorded accurately. And then you come home, and we'll talk about how a cardiologist who now believes in saints can still be an excellent doctor. Because, Ricardo, the world needs physicians who understand both medicine and mystery. I returned to the ICU at 4:15 a.m. By 6 a.m., we had successfully transferred all 7 critical patients to other facilities. Every one of them showed improvement from their conditions 3 days earlier. Sofia Martinez's ejection fraction had stabilized at 40%. Still below normal, but high enough that she was no longer in immediate danger. As I was completing the last of the discharge paperwork, I felt a presence beside me. Carlo Acutis stood there, looking at me with that gentle smile. You made your choice, he said. It wasn't a question. I don't understand what happened here, I admitted. I don't understand how you can be here when you died 18 years ago. I don't understand how hearts can heal this quickly. I don't understand how equipment can measure things that shouldn't exist according to physics. You don't have to understand everything, Carlo replied. Understanding comes gradually as you learn to see with both scientific eyes and spiritual eyes. What matters is that you've stopped insisting that only material reality exists. You've opened yourself to mystery. What about my career? I asked. How do I practice cardiology now? Do I tell my patients to pray instead of taking medications? Carlo laughed, a joyful teenage sound that seemed incongruous in the serious hospital environment. No, Ricardo. God gave humans intelligence and creativity to develop medicine for a reason. Medications work. Surgery works. Medical science is a gift. But it's a gift that works better when physicians recognize they're cooperating with forces larger than themselves. Treat your patients with the same clinical excellence you always have. But now, when you encounter cases that defy medical explanation, don't dismiss them. Investigate them. Document them. Help the medical community understand that some healings involve both material and spiritual dimensions. He placed his hand on my shoulder. You're going to face skepticism from colleagues who still believe only in materialist explanations. They'll say you've had a breakdown, that you've become irrational, that you've abandoned scientific thinking. But you'll also find other physicians, like Dr. Delgado, who have witnessed things they couldn't explain and have been waiting for someone brave enough to speak publicly about the intersection of medicine and mystery. Why me? I asked. Why not choose someone who was already religious, already open to this? Because, Carlo said, testimonies from the already convinced don't change minds. But when a rigid materialist atheist, someone known for mocking faith, experiences something so undeniable that it shatters his certainty, people pay attention. Your conversion will give hope to other skeptics. Your willingness to document supernatural healing scientifically will help bridge the gap between medicine and faith. He began to fade from visibility. Ricardo, I'll be praying for you, and I'll continue interceding for your patients, especially the ones whose conditions defy medical explanation. When you encounter cases you can't figure out, pray to me. Ask for intercession. You'll be surprised how often healing involves both your medical expertise and spiritual forces working together. Will I see you again? I asked. Maybe, Carlo said, his voice growing distant. But you don't need to see me to know I'm real. You have 48 hours of documented evidence. You have equipment that measured unmeasurable things. You have patients whose hearts healed impossibly fast. You have your wife's 23 years of prayer that brought you to this moment. That's enough evidence for a lifetime of faith. He was gone. The ICU was empty except for nursing staff cleaning and sanitizing the evacuated unit. Complete transformation, 35 not a 38. The medical investigation into the events of October 10, 12, 2024 at Hospital de Especialidades, OMI, or 25, lasted 6 months. Hospital administration wanted explanations for the equipment anomalies, the patient improvements, and the evacuation. I provided detailed documentation, monitor readings, equipment logs, patient charts, witness testimonies from 17 staff members who had experienced the supernatural phenomena. The official report, released in April 2025, classified the events as unexplained equipment malfunctions, coinciding with unexpected patient improvements of unclear etiology. It was bureaucratic language designed to avoid explicitly stating what had actually happened. That a blessed soul had manifested physically in our ICU, that his presence had affected medical equipment in ways that violated known physics, and that his intercession had produced healings that defied medical explanation. But those of us who had been there knew the truth, and we talked about it. Not publicly at first, but in quiet conversations with colleagues who had experienced similar events at other hospitals. Dr. Delgado created a private network of physicians who had documented impossible healings. We shared cases, compared notes, tried to develop frameworks for understanding medical events that involved both material and spiritual causation. My relationship with the Martinez family changed completely. Sophia continued to improve over the following months. By December 2024, her ejection fraction had reached 50%, completely normal cardiac function. Her cardiomyopathy had simply resolved. I could document the healing in precise medical terms, echocardiogram measurements, EKG readings, functional capacity assessments. But I could no longer pretend it was a spontaneous remission of unclear etiology. It was a miracle. A documented, measurable, scientifically verifiable miracle. Miguel and Rosa became close friends. They patiently answered my questions about Catholic theology, about intercession of saints, about how to understand supernatural intervention without abandoning scientific thinking. Dr. Mendoza, Miguel told me, faith and reason aren't enemies. They're like two wings of a bird. You need both to fly. Your medical knowledge didn't become invalid when you accepted supernatural reality. It became more complete. My marriage to Elena deepened in ways I couldn't have imagined. Learning about her 23 years of secret prayer for my conversion humbled me profoundly. I thought I was the smart one in our marriage, I told her one night. The rational one. The one who understood reality. But you were seeing dimensions of truth I was blind to. We're both smart, Elena corrected gently. We just have different gifts. You have the gift of precise scientific analysis. I have the gift of faith. Together, we see more than either of us could see alone. I began attending Mass with Elena, tentatively at first, uncertain how to participate in rituals that had seemed meaningless for decades. But gradually, I discovered that liturgy made sense in ways I had never noticed. The prayers weren't superstitious pleading to imaginary beings. They were structured conversations with a God who had proven his reality by sending a teenage saint to shatter my materialist certainty. In January 2025, I made my first confession in 36 years. I confessed my arrogance, my cruelty to patients and families, my mockery of faith, my certainty that I understood reality better than those who believed in God. The priest, who knew my story, said something I'll never forget. Dr. Mendoza, God didn't send Carlo Acutis to condemn you for your unbelief. He sent him to rescue you from the loneliness of a universe where everything is just mechanical chance. Welcome home. My medical practice changed in subtle but significant ways. I still used the same diagnostic tools, prescribed the same evidence-based medications, performed the same clinical procedures. But I also began praying for my patients, not instead of treating them medically, but alongside medical treatment. Lord, guide my hands. Help me see what I need to see. And if healing requires forces beyond medicine, I ask for the intercession of blessed Carlo Acutis. I started noticing things I had previously dismissed. Patients who improved faster than expected. Diagnostic tests that revealed problems just in time for intervention. Complicated cases where the right treatment approach suddenly became clear. I couldn't prove these were supernatural interventions, but I no longer automatically assumed they were just coincidences. Some colleagues thought I had lost my mind. Dr. Mendoza has become religious, they said with concern, as if faith were a symptom of cognitive decline. But other colleagues, especially those who had been present during the events of October 2024, quietly reached out to discuss their own experiences with medical mysteries they couldn't explain. It's been 6 months since Carlo Acutis appeared in my ICU. Sofia Martinez is completely healthy, her heart functioning normally. The equipment anomalies never recurred after the evacuation. Life has returned to apparent normality at Hospital de Especialidades. But everything is different for me. I still practice cardiology with the same clinical excellence I always pursued. I still rely on evidence-based medicine, diagnostic precision, and scientific reasoning. But I now understand that science is a tool for understanding creation, not a complete explanation of reality. I've learned to practice medicine with both professional competence and spiritual humility. I don't tell patients to pray instead of taking medications. I encourage both. I don't dismiss unusual recoveries as coincidences. I investigate them carefully, documenting both medical and circumstantial factors. I've become what I would have once considered impossible, a rigorous scientist who believes in miracles. Elena was right. You don't have to choose between good science and acknowledging supernatural reality. You just have to expand your understanding of what reality includes. The human heart is indeed a pump governed by electrical impulses and mechanical forces. But it's also more than that. An organ whose ultimate animation involves forces that my equipment can measure but never fully explain. I think often about the question Carlo asked me that first night. What keeps your heart beating? I now understand that question has multiple valid answers. Physiologically, my heart beats because of autonomous nervous system regulation of cardiac muscle tissue. But ultimately, my heart beats because God has chosen to sustain my life for purposes I'm still discovering. Both answers are true. Both are necessary for complete understanding. If you're listening to this testimony as a medical professional, especially as someone who considers yourself a skeptic or atheist, I want you to know. I understand your certainty. I shared it for 54 years. I mocked patients who believed in divine healing. I ridiculed faith as superstition. I was absolutely convinced that materialist science could explain everything. But I was wrong. Not wrong about science. Science is valuable, essential, true within its domain. Wrong about believing that science's domain includes all of reality. There are forces, dimensions, and truths that our current instruments cannot measure, but which are nevertheless completely real. You don't have to abandon scientific thinking to accept supernatural reality. You don't have to choose between being a competent physician and believing in miracles. You just have to be willing to admit that your current understanding, however sophisticated, might be incomplete. For those of you who are patients or family members struggling with medical conditions that seem hopeless, I want to offer this perspective. Pursue the best medical care available. Use every resource modern medicine offers. But don't be afraid to also pray, to ask for intercession, to believe that healing might involve both material and spiritual dimensions. Medicine works. Medications heal. Surgical interventions save lives. But sometimes, not always, but sometimes, medical treatment is enhanced by spiritual intercession. Sometimes the prayers your doctor dismisses as superstition are accessing healing forces that complement the medications he prescribes. And to those who have been praying faithfully for years, like my wife Elena prayed for me, without seeing results, don't give up. Elena prayed for 23 years before her prayers were answered. God's timing isn't our timing, but faithful prayer is never wasted. It accumulates in ways we can't see, building toward moments when heaven breaks through and changes everything. I end this testimony with gratitude to Blessed Carlo Acutis, the teenage saint who loved both science and faith, who understood that technology and spirituality weren't opposites, who showed a rigid materialist doctor that reality is far more mysterious and wonderful than he had ever imagined. Carlo, thank you for your intercession. Thank you for not giving up on a stubborn atheist who needed undeniable evidence to shatter his certainty. Thank you for the 48 hours that changed everything. And to anyone listening who thinks miracles only happened in ancient times, who believes that supernatural intervention is inconsistent with scientific understanding, who has convinced themselves that faith and reason are incompatible, I challenge you to remain open, to pay attention to the unexplained, to document the impossible, to consider that maybe, just maybe, your instruments are measuring only part of a multidimensional reality. The God who created the physical laws we study in medicine is not constrained by those laws. The saints who intercede from heaven are not limited by our understanding of what's possible. And healing, true, complete healing, sometimes requires both medical expertise and spiritual intercession working together. May Blessed Carlo Acutis intercede for all of you. May your hearts, both physical and spiritual, be healed. And may you have the courage to see beyond what your instruments can measure, to the greater reality that surrounds and sustains us all. Veritas liberabit vos. The truth will set you free.